Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with, well, VC Andrews. Yeah, he wants me to do an Today we're back here with oldest versus medium versus newest. Today's video is The Miracle Worker. So, never seen this movie, so I don't know what to expect, so let's just hop in and hear more. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy it. Let's go.
Hey fans, it's the VC Andrews Critiquer, and this is actually going to be a very special review today, because on this day, at this very moment, it's time for me to reveal something to you all. I, the VC Andrews Critiquer, am
Super! Thanks for asking. All things considered, I couldn't be better, I must say.
No, not gay.
Not that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
True.
But I am actually autistic, which I had briefly mentioned in my Top 10 Hilda episodes video. Autism is basically a fancy word for weirdo.
I mean, you know
No, just kidding. Autism actually means that I have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, the latter of which mostly in social settings. Why am I bringing this up? Because I actually feel that my life story is very similar to the person who I'm going to be talking about in this video, one of the most incredible people to ever walk the face of the earth, and was a big hope to parents of neurodivergent children everywhere. I'm of course talking about Helen Keller. I'm sure most of you already know her basic story already, but to avoid looking lazy, here's a quick history lesson.
Helen Keller was born on June 27, 1880 to Arthur and Catherine Keller in Alabama, and at first, life was pretty damn good for them. Helen was pretty smart for her age, even saying words like water as a baby.
Not really.
Well, close enough. But when Helen was 18 months, tragedy struck. Young Helen came down with a severe illness that doctors highly doubted that she'd survive. And while she did survive, it came at a great cost. You see, to save their daughter, Helen's parents had promised this terrifying entity called the Fairy Queen that in 10 years' time, they would relinquish custody of their daughter to her in exchange for saving her life, but decided to offer themselves instead, and even erasing their daughter's memories of them to keep her from...
That's Hilda.
Okay, come on, guys. That setup was just begging for a Hilda Season 3 reference. But okay, let's get a bit more accurate here. No, while Helen did recover from the illness, she had been left both blind and deaf. Kind of a two-for-one raw deal, ain't it? And unable to see or hear, Helen only knew how to communicate with her family through violent tantrums, both verbally and physically, and needless to say, her family found it quite unbearable. But at first they decided to put up with it since it seemed she couldn't help it, and no doctor they turned to seemed able to cure Helen. That is until Alexander Graham Bell himself suggested they contact the Perkins School for the Blind and Deaf for assistance in dealing with Helen. They did so, and they sent one of their most gifted students named Miss Ann Sullivan to the Kellers to serve as Helen's paraprofessional. And even if things did...
So, funnily enough, I think Alexander Graham Bell did not do a lot of good for blind or deaf people. Which is kind of nuts when you think of it like that. Yeah, dude invented the telephone, did not like deaf people, apparently. Even though I think he had a deaf son, I think. I mean, you can look it up. I mean, what I learned in my ASL class. He's just looking around, but like I said, every hero does have a dark backstory behind them or something.
It started off more than a little rocky with Anne and Helen. Anne was finally able to make some progress with the girl with a little alone time together. That sounded really bad, but I'll explain the context later. And sure enough, Helen learned to communicate through sign language instead of violence. And Helen eventually became a milestone, accomplishing many feats that no other blind or deaf person had ever done before, like earning a bachelor's degree, writing and publishing over 14 frickin' books, traveling across the world and meeting many famous people, and more. And I honestly have had a pretty similar past to Helen. Okay, so I'm not nearly as famous, but I think you can see the parallels too that I'm about to bring up. I was 3 years old when I was first diagnosed with autism, and 26 years ago, my mom couldn't even say that word without crying. I'd apparently lost a lot of my communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal, and would often keep to myself, and things did not look promising for me. But did my folks give up? Nope. Like Mr. and Mrs. Keller, they had some very smart behavioral aides come and see me. And no, none of them actually moved in with us, but I'd go see them sometimes, and they taught me a variety of social and communication skills that my folks learned to teach me as well.
Take a minute.
Unfortunately, music never ended up being one of my strong strengths. But bottom line is, like Helen Keller, I got off to a bit of a rocky start, but bit by bit, I climbed up the ladder to make everyone proud of me. And even if I didn't become an international celebrity, I have given hope to many parents of children diagnosed with autism, and as a special treat for all of you, I have interviews from them as well as my parents at the very end of this video about their experience of, well, dealing with a kid with autism. Skip here if you want to see it now, but first things first, I have to share my thoughts with you.
Right, back to Helen.
While Helen's story has been told all over media, the most popular depiction is the 1959 stage play The Miracle Worker, which has been adapted to film over 3 times. Or 4 if you count the very artistic licensed version depicted in the classic South Park episode Helen Keller the Musical. But the only question is, which version best showcases the emotional roller coaster that young Helen had to go through to learn how to navigate life in complete silence and darkness, as well as the stress that Annie had to deal with, especially considering that she herself, well, we'll talk about that in a bit, actually. I may not be a licensed doctor or paraprofessional, but I think I can successfully diagnose which movie is the best.
Well, except when it comes to music.
And I definitely have never had an ear for music. This is oldest versus median versus newest, The Miracle Worker.
Yeah, I swore that if I had to see it one more time, I'd put a bullet in my head. But luckily, I got really stoned before I came.
And in her little town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the name of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents didn't even tell her.
Here we go.
Young Helen had no easy tasking through life in complete silence and darkness, and even if she did succeed in flying colors eventually, she didn't get that way overnight. No, like a lot of other kids with disabilities, Helen initially seemed like a lost cause, but with Annie's patience and persistence, she figured out how to best utilize her sense of touch and smell. So let's see which one we wanted to see. Sorry, bad choice of words. Wanted to experience succeed the most with Best Helen Keller.
And in her little town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the name of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents didn't even tell her.
And the role of our navigator of complete silence and darkness, we have Patty Duke, Melissa Gilbert, and Haley Eisenberg. One thing you've probably already noticed is Helen is very obviously played by a teenager in the oldest and median, even though she's outright said to be 7 years old in both movies. Haley Eisenberg, on the other hand, actually was about 7 when she played our titular heroine. More on which one best captured the essence of a 7-year-old in a bit. Like I've said before, Helen was not much better behaved than Cartman when he doesn't get an iPad. Again, her parents didn't think it was right to discipline her since it allegedly was not her fault and couldn't control it. So tantrums were the only way that Helen knew how to communicate back then. But then Annie came in and taught Helen that there were much more effective ways to communicate, even in blind deafness, that wouldn't irritate everyone around her to death. And while the steps of said journey themselves are well conveyed in all 3 versions, the depiction of Helen I was most interested in seeing succeed was Patty Duke's portrayal in The Oldest. How come? Well, even though she was still very obviously a teenager, she captured the essence of a 7-year-old so effectively, it was actually very easy for me to suspend my disbelief.
Eyes. You want the doll to have eyes.
She was just like Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz. She's able to convey the nature of a young child so effectively with her performance, you're actually able to buy her as, well, a young child. Melissa Gilbert in The Median, on the other hand, well, she failed miserably at playing a 7-year-old. It's like the filmmakers tried to capture the same magic that Patty Duke brought in by casting a kid who looked so much like the original and was also a teen like in the original, but didn't seem to take into consideration finding a teen who could convincingly play a young child. Yeah, no offense to Melissa, but I never bought her as a 7-year-old for one split second. I could tell that she was trying to capture that same feel, but she just didn't seem to have that natural ability that Patty had to make us believe she was 7 years old when she so obviously wasn't. Melissa Gilbert felt like a teenager through and through, so in scenes like when Helen was cradling her doll, I wasn't endeared, I was honestly kind of snickering. Really? You know, looking back at it, if Emily hadn't outgrown Jessie as a teen and was still playing with her, yeah, the whole When She Loved Me song from Toy Story 2 kind of loses its emotional resonance when you look back at it. And as for Haley Eisenberg, well again, she actually was about 7 when she played the role, so I don't think there's really any question that she captured the spirit of a 7-year-old girl. But being believable as a young child is one thing. The bigger task our 3 actresses were given was making us feel for Helen and the journey she had to go through, especially considering that, justified or not, Helen does start out as an entitled whiny brat. So it's a big job on the actresses to make her likable even when she's throwing complete tantrums. And once again,
I don't know if it's like she was entitled, but remember, she can't hear or see, so she doesn't know what she's doing in a way. like, for most kids, they can hear, or at least hear what they sound like, but remember, she's both blind and deaf, so she doesn't know what she's saying, doesn't know what she's doing. Basically, blind as a bat and deaf as a mole. So, I mean, remember, it's her only way to communicate since, it gets results. Like, it's why kids tend to, grow into tantrums if parents work through it. Or at least, if they cave, right? Because they know the tantrum works, so they keep doing it. Learning behavior. So again, it's not her fault. It's more like, again, because she's blind deaf, she doesn't have any other way of working around it, Ouch. I mean, really hard to get your message across where you can't even hear it or even see it, I mean, you gotta feel bad for Helen here since, again, she's only throwing the tantrums because, again, she can't see or hear. Yeah. Imagine losing the both of them. Anyway.
And I feel that honor goes to Patty Duke. You'll note that Helen actually was pretty well known for her outgoing personality, and in theory, Haley Eisenberg should have been a perfect casting choice for Helen.
But I'm guessing
she was freaking awesome in movies like Polly and How to Eat Fried Worms, but especially Polly. Seriously, that is such an underrated film. Well, unfortunately, I can't say the same for her performance here. I don't know if maybe she just wasn't given the same directing as she was in Polly or How to Eat Fried Worms, or maybe if the year 2000 just wasn't the stride of her acting career, but she always just felt so restrained and introverted here. Yes, I know Helen was blind and deaf, but even before she learned how to get through life being such, Helen was still outgoing and, well, memorable. And Haley Eisenberg was, well, no offense to Haley, but kind of like how most people perceived blind and deaf people at the time. Just a lifeless lump on a log. Take the scene where Helen and Annie are having a slap fight with each other.
Yeah, it doesn't really...
Yeah, I know this was probably because Disney had concerns about showing physical child abuse, but nonetheless, this is just... really? Even if Melissa Gilbert failed miserably at playing a 7-year-old girl, her attempts to try and play one did at least make her performance a bit more memorable. Haley was cute, sure, but a cute face can only bring so much charm without a cute personality. Honestly, every second Patty Duke was on screen was a joy to watch,
make sure it's,
especially
relatable.
during this scene where Annie's teaching her how to read facial expressions with her hands, and her attempts to emulate said expressions are... I mean, how can you not freaking love these expressions? Even the scenes where Helen was laughing
by the scenes where okay, we gotta do it again.
Them, you're still able to root for her and want her to succeed in life. When Melissa Gilbert was eating like a pig, I was just grossed out. When Haley Eisenberg was eating like a pig, I was just indifferent on the matter. But when Patty Duke did it, I honestly wouldn't have minded eating dinner with her more often. She's probably the only person on Earth who I'd actually want to dine with on account of her bad table manners. That is pretty freaking impressive. But at the same time, Duke really managed to convey Helen's stress of the situation as well. I mean, really, just imagine for a second what it would be like to live in total silence and darkness. Yeah, that concept sounds pretty freaking disturbing, doesn't it? And I will admit, all three actresses did do a pretty respectable job at conveying Helen's misery with the situation, but looking back at the three, it's clear that Duke was definitely the most frustrated by, well, her
failure to communicate.
And this made her first major triumph that we'll talk about in the best story round all the more awesome and satisfying to watch. Again, I know this round has been pretty one-sided, but I'm sorry, Patty Duke just crushed the part of Helen, making her endearing, believable as a young child, and most importantly, tragic, thus making for the depiction that we wanted most to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Metaphorically speaking.
Point goes to the oldest.
They're just still getting physical with one, yep.
One thing you may have noticed in fiction is a lot of characters named Annie are portrayed as lovable and good-hearted, but our Annie is actually a bit different, showing that there is quite the difference between good and nice. How you can have the best intentions in the whole world, but still be cold as hell if the people you're working with deserve... Wait, cold as hell?
Yeah, you might want to rephrase that.
Words,
tough love.
But still, our Annie's
gotta get that toast of tough love.
Boost in charge to guarantee success.
Just not too...
Okay, I admit, all those characteristics do indeed describe Annie January, aka Starlight from The Boys, but the boost in charge I'm talking about with our Annie is a bit more metaphorical. This is Best Annie Sullivan.
Here
And
comes
in
Miss
the
Sullivan.
town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the name of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents can't even tell her.
Anne Sullivan, better known as Annie Sullivan and also the Miracle Worker, is respectively played by Anne Bancroft, Patty Duke, and Allison Elliott.
Cool.
And yes, you heard that right. Patty Duke, who played Helen herself, the oldest, is now playing Anne Sullivan in the median. More info on that casting choice in a bit. Anyway, I already knew that Annie
Guess
was a
didn't work
stern
out
but
well.
caring tutor to Helen, who would often have to resort to tough love, but I was actually surprised to learn that she herself had
So,
originally been
let's
blind
see
as
which
a
one has
kid
the best mixture
before her
of tough
sight was
love and
restored with several
Miracle Worker.
operations, and that she herself grew up in a 19th century asylum with her brother Jimmy, and thus is well aware of the horrific existence it entails, especially considering little Jimmy himself died in the place, and this gives her
Poor
all the more
Jimmy.
determination to succeed in her quest with helping Helen get through life, as the traumatic memories of that shithole plague her frequently, and she is dead set on making sure that Helen does not end up with the same miserable childhood that she did, and this naturally makes her a very engaging historical figure to watch. But which actress captures said determination the best? Can Patty Duke pull off the same massive acting talent as Annie that she did when she played Helen? Well, as much as I praise the hell out of her performance as Helen, she unfortunately made for my least favorite of the three depictions of Annie Sullivan. First off, let me just clarify, it's not so much her acting, it's her execution of it. The idea is that Anne Sullivan's been shell-shocked from her miserable existence in the
i.e.
asylum,
PTSD.
and Patty Duke just felt way too happy and mellow. Even the scenes where she's supposed to be firm and intimidating, I felt like I was talking to Luna Lovegood.
Miss Sullivan, I find it difficult to talk through those glasses.
Oh, of course.
Really? I honestly find her less intimidating with them on.
Really? For this tyrant? The whole house turns on her whims. Is there anything she wants she doesn't get?
Harry Potter, you listen to me right now.
I guess my big
Yeah,
issue is
fair
that
enough.
all that
Not
endearing
well.
charm that Patty had as Helen really doesn't work on Annie. Annie
True,
Sullivan's
a
charm
little
works in a
too
rather
nice for
different
the role.
way. Again, she's likable because she's dead set on keeping Helen from winding up in the same miserable fate that she did as a kid, and is willing to resort to tough love to keep her from winding up in that fate. And with Patty Duke, even when she's trying, we just seem to still be getting that dorkability we got from her as Helen, and it just doesn't work here. As you may have guessed, the actress that best pulls off Annie Sullivan, in
oldest?
my opinion, is Anne Bancroft in The Oldest. Apparently, the director of The Oldest was willing to take a budget cut for the film to get her cast in the role instead of a big-name actress.
Really?
And I, for one, say
Why?
that budget cut was more than worth it. For one, she actually is intimidating, especially when she's wearing those glasses.
Miss Sullivan, I find it difficult to talk through those glasses.
Now, I agree with you there, Captain. That bitch is terrifying. And assertive. Yeah, this Annie is definitely a lot more blunt when expressing herself to the Kellers.
I don't think Helen's worst handicap is deafness and blindness. I think it's your love and pity. All of you are so sorry for her, you've kept her like a pet. I grew up in such an asylum. The state almshouse. Rats. Why, my brother Jimmy and I used to play with the rats because we didn't have toys. Maybe you'd like to know what Helen will find there not on visiting days.
You can better understand why the Kellers in this version were willing to let their daughter live completely alone with someone they barely knew for over 2 weeks. And just to clarify, she wants to do so because she feels that her attempts to be firm with Helen are ineffective if she can run to her parents for protection. Okay, that sounded really bad. What I'm trying to say is, she feels Helen's parents intervening her attempts to discipline her are stunting her growth, and they kind of are, so she insists on living with Helen in the Keller's cabin in the woods for 2 weeks to teach her without Helen having the option to retreat to her folks if she doesn't like it. If any other person...
I mean, you ain't wrong. I mean, when you think of it like that, like, if you got difficult parents, you gotta remember, like, they're usually the one encouraging the behavior, which we do see. I mean, fair to history, I guess, so what do you guys think? Honestly, Anne made a good call there, you know, get away from the safe space, and force her to grow. Anyway.
Poses to me if I had a kid, I'd tell them to get the hell out of my house before I called the cops. But Bancroft's deliverance of Annie's recollection of the horrors of growing up in a 19th century asylum are so terrifying, they would definitely convince me that her intentions for this were altruistic, and that anything would be better than my kid going through such a fate at that horrible place. Not even after saying these things.
She has to be dependent on me. For what? Everything. The food she eats, the clothes she wears, fresh air. Yes, the air she breathes. Whatever her body needs is a primer to teach her out of.
Again, if anyone else said stuff like that to me, I'd call the cops. But Bancroft's natural trauma of the horrors of an asylum is a very persuasive argument. And this definitely works much better for someone who lived a childhood as god-awful as hers. I mean, if you had to watch, or rather hear about, since again she was blind as a kid, your peers getting pregnant at just 13, and hearing your own brother die, hell, you could argue that not being able to see it and it being left to her imagination was even more traumatic. You probably wouldn't grow up to be an optimist either. And honestly, Helen doesn't need an optimist to get through life. Please remember that up to now, Helen had been almost as spoiled as Veruca Salt. Well, maybe not quite to that level, but still pretty close. So a soft and understanding person would not have been the ideal person to help her. She needed someone as strong and stubborn as herself to get her to shut up. I mean, to learn how to communicate effectively.
There you go.
And again, I feel that stern tough love was brilliantly conveyed through Anne Bancroft. But it's never to a point where she's unlikable either. As harsh as she is, the movie does make it very clear that she has Helen's best interests at heart every second. She knows Helen is far more capable than her family gives her credit for, and being passive is not going to help her grow. Well, maybe grow fatter, since the Kellers up to now had been willing to let Helen take the food off their plates. Annie, on the other hand, is not inclined to share. Well, my point is, she simply will not stand for Helen's bullshit for 1 second. But anyway, she's kind to Helen when she deserves it, just not to a point where she comes off as too much as a softie. Oh yeah, and I guess I should talk about Allison Elliott's portrayal in the newest. She did a fine job as Annie. Definitely more traumatized and authoritative than Patty Duke was, but she still pales in comparison to Anne Bancroft. And that's really all I have to say about her, I'm afraid. Just adequate.
It was pretty forgettable.
Oh, come on, don't look at me like that. It's not my fault that the oldest version did such a great casting job for the 2 female leads. I'm not biased, I just call it how I see.
Well, you know it. Understand it. We'll go with that.
Anne Bancroft was the most intimidating and traumatized, but also determined and motivated.
The perfect mixture of all. Point goes to the oldest again.
Think I'm so easily gotten rid of.
Oh, you little devil.
Oh, boy. Yeah, it's oldest. That's another one for you.
But even if Annie Sullivan was the biggest factor in pushing Helen towards success, that doesn't mean Helen's family didn't play a part in that as well. I mean, after all, they did hire Annie to begin with, and, well, okay, so maybe they actually didn't do a whole lot with her success, but that doesn't mean
they pretty much said,
so why don't we
give
take
up,
a look at
all your end.
Best Keller family?
Comes the Kellers.
Town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the name of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents can't even tell her.
Sorry.
I gotta say, I really find the Miracle Workers' portrayals of the rest of the Keller family pretty
harsh?
Interesting, let's just say.
What?
Well, a ton of biographies and documentaries really gave us a ton of info on the feisty, lovable nature of Helen, and the stern but also determined and caring persona of Annie. Not many sources really give us much info on what the rest of the family was like. So, without much historical info to go off of, it seems that the playwright William Gibson had to rely on, well, family film cliches when portraying the Keller family. Like, Helen's mom is the kind-hearted and loyal maternal figure who's deeply agonized that her own daughter has to live in complete silence and darkness, and refuses to give up on her no matter how much bullshit or stress she brings upon them. Helen's dad really does love Helen deep down and wants the best for her, but simply doesn't have nearly as much patience for her antics as her mom does, and feels the need to show indifference on the situation to maintain a stern, authoritative, and sexist image as the head of the household. James being your stereotypical teenager who finds his sister
half-sister, half mentally defective.
Well, he finds Helen a complete embarrassment, even admitting in the newest that the reason he never has any of his friends over to his place is because he doesn't want them to see his freak sister, and has zero faith that she can never get better, and is adamant that she be put in an asylum and thus out of their hair for good. Yeah, he kind of redeems himself in the end, but he is such a dick for most of the film, it's kind of hard to forgive him. And Helen's aunt is the good-natured grandma-like figure to Helen, who's noticeably less stressed by her behavior than the rest of the family. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's bad that the story relies on cliches, and there's actually a decent chance this is what the Kellers were like in real life. I'm just saying, these characters are portrayed exactly as you'd expect for a drama revolving around a blind and deaf girl who has no apparent hope that learns how to succeed with some elbow grease. But I digress. Which depiction of the family conveys these cliches the best? Well, I will say, unlike Helen or Annie, both of whom I came to a decision with pretty quickly, this one was actually a little more difficult because all the actors honestly do pretty damn well at portraying these characters. Regarding the older brother... Whatever, you jerk. Anyway, all three actors do well portraying him as the self-centered teen who wants nothing to do with his sister at first, but at the same time does have some pretty memorable snarky lines.
Well, Helen locked her in the room and run off with the key.
And I suppose you were going to sit there and say nothing.
You told me it was none of my business, Father.
How can an inexperienced, half-blind Yankee schoolgirl manage it?
Great improvement. Now we have two of them to look after.
You be quiet.
I was agreeing with you.
You talk too much.
But I think that the heavy southern accent the newest one gives him kind of a redneck feel, and since rednecks are known for being intolerant, this works well for his role as the older brother who's unfeeling towards his sister's condition. And on top of that, he did feel a little more mean to Helen than the other two were. Again, in this film, I mean,
it makes sense. They're in Alabama, so... I mean, not saying anything, but still. I mean, I think I could still get my southern drawl out there, but you get the idea. Okay, there it goes again. But yeah, I think when you're going to Alabama, you could definitely feel more like back then. I don't know if the accent was back then in the 1800s, or at least 1900s, or maybe the late 1880s. Okay, late 1800s. I don't know if they were back then, but I was curious about those accents. Anyway.
Flat said he didn't want his friends over because he found Helen an embarrassment. Regarding Helen's kind aunt, another tough choice, but I think I like the medium one best because she felt the most naturally like a sweet, loving grandma figure. But of course, the big deciding point is Helen's parents themselves, and yeah, sorry, but I kinda gotta go with the oldest again. Jeez, I know, but again, don't blame me, blame the casting directors for casting such effective actors. And Helen's parents are, again, no exception, I'm afraid. While all three versions of Helen's mother are indeed very loyal and determined to help her kid succeed without dumping her in an asylum, or this way that's suggested the newest.
What, you want to lock her away in the attic like some sort of mad woman?
Maybe that's not actually such a bad idea. And maybe lock James up there with her. That sure brought Kathy and Christopher Dollinger closer together. Maybe
please don't give me the wallflower ideas.
Okay, moving on. But as devoted as she is, Dingus Winston, the oldest, just seemed a lot more firm about standing up for her daughter.
It's not pleasant to see her about all the time.
Do you dare complain of what you can see? She did fold her napkin. She learns. She learns.
She's a natural Johanna, if I do say so myself. Not just that, but I also just felt she felt the worst for her daughter's condition, and it's clear that she'd sell her soul in exchange for a pair of eyes and ears for her daughter. But since doing so would lead to her eternal damnation, she'll have to sell for the next best thing with Miss Annie. And as for the father, Captain Arthur Keller, who by the way is played by Victor Jory in The Oldest, who we'd previously seen as Injun Joe in my Tom Sawyer comparison. Anyway, I personally like Victor Jory's portrayal the best, because even though he was still able to come off as a stern, authoritative, Von Trapp-like father figure, you could still feel a bit of a softy spot in him.
If you'll give me your attention, Miss Sullivan. Now, I've tried to make allowances for you because you come from a part of the country where people, women I should say, come from, for whom allowances must be made. I have decided, nevertheless.
My problem with his depiction of the media and newest was, while they both really conveyed the stern authority figure of the character, I didn't feel quite enough of the love he had deep down for Helen. I mean, it was still there in both those versions, but it felt a bit underplayed. Victor Jory wasn't exactly blunt about his affection for his daughter either, but the fact that he came off as honestly quite lovable at times despite his demeanor did still make his affection for his daughter more obvious. Again, balancing stern, cold authoritativeness with sweet warmness is admittedly pretty hard to do, and I'm not saying that I got the impression that Captain Keller didn't love his daughter in the other two films. No, he did. I just felt Victor Jory's more obvious soft side made that more obvious and thus more likable. Again, blame the original for casting the best casting directors. I simply call it as I see it, and since I like one family best in the newest, one in the median, and two in the oldest, that simply would logically mean that the oldest should get the point again. Besides, they are her parents and arguably the most important members of the family, so I have to give credit where credit is due.
Point goes to the
oldest again.
You talk too much.
You could show some sympathy.
Yeah, well, we'll work on it.
Now, it is true that Helen Keller did meet a lot of famous people in her life, like Eleanor Roosevelt, Alexander Graham Bell, President Eisenhower, Charlie Chaplin, and many more. But unfortunately, the people involved with her time in first meeting Annie, which is the time frame that the Miracle Worker covers, more on that in a bit.
Right.
The people there are a bit fewer and not quite as impactful. But I am still determined to find the best in what we do have here with Best Supporting Cast.
What's the cast?
In a little town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the name of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents can't even tell her.
Let's go.
Again, this round is going to be really short because other than Helen, Annie, and the rest of the Keller family, none of the other characters have more than 5 minutes of screen time. But again, I'll make the most of what I have. I will give the newest film credit in that some of the servants do have a bit more screen time. Like here we actually see what leads up to Helen attacking one of the servants' daughters with a pair of scissors. We also see some of James's friends who he'd mentioned didn't want to have over to his house because of Helen, and I can kind of see where he gets his hillbilly behavior from that the rest of the family seems to lack, but they're still mostly just there. In all 3 films, there are really just 2 side characters I feel have legit relevance to the story. One is Percy, the servant boy to the Kellers that has pretty little patience for Helen's antics, especially when he participates in trying to help Annie teach Helen the alphabet and sign language. Not entirely unjustifiable, though. And the benevolent Dean of Perkins' school that sends Annie on a request to help Helen is clearly going to miss her a lot. And just hear me out, okay? I like the depiction of Percy best the oldest because he seemed the youngest of the 3, so I felt he had a little bit more of a pass to get annoyed with Helen since he was just a little kid. When you're a little kid, it's more understandable I'd probably be weirded out by the antics of someone who's been blind and deaf the majority of their life. I mean, you're still young, so it figures that someone experiencing this kind of thing for the first time would be weirded out. Since the other 2 are in their young teens, you kind of expect them to be a bit more mature and understanding about her antics. Again, I don't know if that was actually his age in real life, but it kind of makes him more sympathetic here. In the other 2 films, he kind of felt like a slightly younger version of James. And as for the Dean, all 3 versions seem like nice mentor figures to Annie, but whereas the media newest he interacts with Annie in his office at the school, the oldest one actually goes to the trouble to get on the train that Annie is departing on to the Kellers before it leaves to give her a pep talk. Not to mention he brought some of her friends to the academy to see her off as well. That shows a bit more dedication and admiration for his people, and to be perfectly honest, I just want a stronger bond with the 2 in their interaction.
Nowhere but back to that dreadful place where you grew up learning to be saucy. Annie, I know how unhappy it was for you there, but that battle is dead and done with. Why not let it stay buried? A gift with our affection.
What should I say? I'm an ignorant, opinionated girl, and everything I am I owe to you.
That is only half true, Annie.
Which half?
His pep talk to Annie definitely has a lot more heart than in the other 2 films. It's a short scene, but it still made me smile. And that's really all I got. Told you this one would be short. Again, like I said, the side characters don't really have much to offer here, but for what little they do, I feel most of that came from, again, the
casting director.
Again, not biasing, just such a damn good cast.
Point goes to
the oldest again.
This battle is dead and done with.
Job.
Yeah, so we already got a winner.
Of course, the story of Helen Keller itself very rightfully deserves its recognition in history, but which adaptation of Gibson's play best showcased the twilight of her journey overcoming complete silence and darkness? This is Best Story.
And in a little town of 1800s Alabama, there's a family by the
Here we
name
go.
of Keller. Their daughter's deaf and mute and blind as a bat, but her parents can't even tell her.
Here we go.
I will admit, at first I was kind of disappointed to learn that this film only covered the very beginning of Helen's expedition through the dark. I was kind of hoping to get more of a full life story biopic, because again, I already knew most of the basic events of this story, like Helen's condition being incurable despite several doctors' best efforts, Annie being the perfect match for Helen with her strong stubbornness and persistence, Helen not understanding any sign language teachings no matter how hard she tries until, well, we'll get into that in a bit. I initially wasn't sure if just the beginning of the story would be enough to hold my interest, but I was pleasantly surprised to learn that there was actually a lot more to said beginning of Helen Keller's story than I had thought, like how Annie herself had originally been blind and grew up in a horrific 19th century asylum, the Kellers being so desperate to help their kid that they'll let her live alone for 2 weeks with a lady they barely know, and more. It's honestly a really beautiful and engaging story, and afterwards I was thinking, yeah, to hell with seeing her meet all those celebrities or accomplish all those feats as an adult, this is way more interesting, and I honestly saw quite a bit of my own childhood in overcoming my autism with the help of my behavioral aids in Helen's story, so it really hit home for me. So yeah, this film was really good. Only downside is, comparing the story almost seems pointless because almost all of the dialogue and incidents are completely identical in all 3 versions. Hell, I almost didn't think I'd be able to do a comparison. They were so similar, what was there even to compare? But then I thought, if Annie Sullivan didn't give up on Helen, then neither will I. And I'm glad I didn't give up, because I was able to find a favorite version. Take 3 guesses which one.
The oldest.
Okay, so the oldest may not have a whole lot more to offer, but what it does offer is definitely worth mentioning. For one, where the median newest opened straight when Helen is 7 years old, or allegedly 7 in the median, the oldest one actually bothers to show us when Helen had the high fever that almost killed her. And yes, it is pretty over the top, but you can still feel the sheer horror in Helen's parents as their child is pretty much confirmed to be a goner by the doc. And seeing their reactions when they find out she survived, but then they have their hopes dashed again upon discovering she's now blind and deaf is a pretty intense moment.
When I screamed, she didn't blink! Not an eyelash!
Helen!
She just
That's a pretty ballsy intro,
Yeah, that's
and a
not
great way
good.
to keep the viewers invested from the beginning. Another advantage it has is that it has the most amount of times that Annie has horrific recollections of her god-awful childhood, and they're all scary as hell. The grainy camera effect and double exposure shots are utilized to perfection to recap the horrors of Annie's childhood, and you can feel every ounce of trauma she has through them. The median's approach to these scenes is a bit different. The recollection scenes it has are completely verbal, which I'll admit was not a bad approach either. Considering Annie was blind when these scenes happened, it's fitting that we would only hear them and not see them at all. And the newest one may show these scenes just straight on with no strings or blind creativity attached.
Bad idea, though.
But it still does a pretty good job at executing them in a disturbing, if not especially creative manner. Only downside is, these horrific recollections only happen twice in the median and newest. Needless to say, that's not quite enough to give us an idea of the trauma Annie had to endure in that place, and to show why she's so determined to make sure Helen doesn't wind up there too. But overall, I think it's safe to say that the biggest advantage the oldest has is the people behind it were just so talented. Not just the actors, but the director, the composer, the editors. They really gave their all to make the film so engaging, despite the writing and plot being largely identical to the median and newest. Really shows how the medium is the message, but I think this is best showcased in the ending. But before we get into that, it's time for a very special moment on my show. I've been a YouTuber for 5 years now, and you guys all deserve to know my real name. No, it's not VC Andrews. My real name is actually... No, just kidding. My real name is actually Frank the Third, but I go by Trip, which is short for Triple, to be distinguished from my dad, who's the second. Speaking of which, I'm now going to have my parents and arguably the two most important therapists I had, Jason and Barbie.
Hey, Barbie. Hey. She's so cool.
Not that funny.
And tell you all what gave them all hope with dealing with an autistic child like myself.
My experience was 2 things. One is the importance of hope, that hope will carry you, and it's important to keep holding on to it even in the times that there might be a slide back or you can't feel it. The other thing is that, Trip, you were a person that exuded and expressed love. And that always made the walk and journey with you so joyful. Even when times were hard and you were acquiring skills and finding your way, you had a sense of love in you that people felt.
It was pretty evident at a very early age that Tripp was gifted with a huge heart, and that heart had an immense effect on almost everybody he interacted with. And didn't really wasn't able to articulate it at the time, but it was always a great source of comfort that wherever Tripp went, wherever whoever he interacted with, he was going to have a positive environment around him of people that wanted the best for him because of his huge heart.
For a person to succeed, you need to have people around you we need to have people around that person who all believe that you are going to be successful, that we can teach you and figure out your brain and how it best works and teach you to be successful and help you be successful.
Your parents were their goals for you, and the future they saw for you were eerily similar to the goals I had for you, and I knew that they were going to do whatever they had to do to make that a certainty. They were going to sacrifice, they were going to work hard, they were going to do anything they could do to help you, and they did. They did that. They did that plus 2.
I did not deserve to have such awesome people in my life, but my point is, it's pretty clear what's the main thing that gave them all the hope they had that I could get to where I am today. Love. if there's love in the life of a child who has a disability like me or Helen, then there's hope. I think that's brilliantly showcased in the ending of The Oldest. So in all 3 movies, Helen returns from her retreat with Annie, having only made marginal progress at best during her time, and when she's having a relapse at dinner, Annie decides it's time to get through to Helen once and for all and comes up with a revolutionary idea, taking Helen out to a water pump and spelling out the word water in sign language while she's pouring water onto Helen's hand. And sure enough, it works! And what follows can only be described as, well, love all over the place, in the characters' expressions, their interactions, and even the music.
Mother! Papa! She knows!
She knows!
Yes, it's also pretty heartwarming in the other 2 versions, but it felt a bit more like your typical sweet family film climax. The love that's displayed in the climax of The Oldest is the special kind of love that helps a child with a disability succeed in life, and even if it's most prominent in the climax, we feel that love frequently in The Oldest, and I think that's a big part of why it was another clean sweep here like with Annie. It was just such a brilliant, moving, engaging, and most of all, heartfelt movie that really hit the heart of someone who walked a similar path in life to Helen.
Point and victory go to The Oldest, the film that most triumphs in showcasing Helen's triumph in overcoming her blindness and deafness.
Are you jealous, are you?
Yeah. You rarely see a film that could pretty much just sweep their old... the films that pretty much try it, you know? And even I felt like tearing up from watching that scene, you know? She knows! I don't know why. Did anyone else tear up? Let me know. Just... dang. Let me know your favorites. Hope you enjoyed. Adios.